This is the amateur logician. Together, let's think about logically classifying ideas. Logic is a science that governs reasoning. Our thinking is intentional. There is, so to speak, an aboutness to it. We're going to think about ideas in terms of their origin, the objects represented by ideas. We can think about ideas as relating to each other, as relational. We can also think about the degrees of perfection of an idea. We can have an idea that we hold in our mind in a more or less clear or obscure manner, and so on and so forth. But let's step back for a moment. The object of an idea is that which it represents. What's called the material object of the idea is the object as it really is in reality. And what's called the formal object of the idea is the idea as such, as it is in your mind or my mind as specific notes represented in thought. And the sum total of notes represented in an idea is called the comprehension. We can classify ideas according to their origin. We can classify ideas in terms of the objects represented, or how perfectly they represent the given object. And we can think about ideas in terms of their relations among each other, or in other words, as relational. Now, in terms of origin, an idea is either intuitive or derivative. We reach an idea either in an intuitive way or a derivative way. If it's intuitive, we apprehend the idea directly from the object in question. If derivative, however, then it is via a synthesis of intuitive ideas or logical combinations. For example, God is a derived idea. We don't see him out there in the world. God is oftentimes thought about in contrast to the various finite things we see around us. Or take the idea of a syllogism. That's a logical idea that's derived. And it's certainly not something you can just point to in the world and say, hey, there's a syllogism. Now, intuitive concepts are either direct or reflex. That is, if the idea gets its genesis from within the mind or from without. Derivative concepts are either arbitrary or discursive. The synthesis process can be totally arbitrary, as when we create an idea of a unicorn, which doesn't exist out there in the world, or it can be based on logical reasoning, in which case we have something that's discursive. Next, we can classify ideas in terms of how the object is being represented. It'll be represented in terms of comprehension or extension. Remember, comprehension deals with the objective notes of an idea. An idea may be simple or complex, depending if there's one note or many notes with a given idea. A complex idea is, so to speak, complex. It has many features to it. An idea may also be concrete or abstract. Consider an abstract idea. There's a separation of some attribute or feature from a subject. For example, whiteness is an abstract idea. In contrast, something concrete is inherent in a subject or just is a subject in substance. For example, a lily is concrete. Yet even here we can consider the nature of being a lily in the abstract as liliness, so to speak. Moreover, in regards to abstract ideas, abstraction can either be positive or negative. We can have positively abstract ideas and negatively abstract ideas. If positive, then the subject is positively excluded when considering the idea in question. But if negative, then the subject is not strictly excluded or included, but we prescend from the subject. Now, according to extension, we have universal, particular singular, and transcendental. If it is singular, then we're referring to one definite individual. For example, the family of Plato. In that case, we have a collective, or the city of Chicago. If it is universal, then the notes of the idea reference many things, and we're referring to all the things that that idea refers to. For example, the idea of family in general, or the idea of city in general. If it is particular, then it is restricted to some portion of its extension. For example, we're thinking about some families or some cities. In addition, a universal idea can be thought of in terms of direct or reflex. A direct universal idea is negatively abstract. It's something that, so to speak, has a life of its own from the mind as being a feature of reality, but doesn't exist in the manner in which it exists in the mind. Consider triangularity. Now, any Euclidean triangle we perceive or imagine in our mind's eye will be equilateral, isosceles, or scalene. But the concept as such presents this because it, in a way, embraces all three possibilities. But no one triangle can be all three at once without a contradiction. The universal concept, though, has these three possibilities built in it, as it were. Now, a reflex universal idea cannot exist outside of the mind, period. It is a logical foundation in reality, but it's an idea that only exists in the mind. The idea of a syllogism is such an example. Certain purely logical ideas, like a syllogism, are reflex universal. Now, transcendental extension deals with everything out there in existence. We can predicate sometimes everything out there insofar as it exists. And this gets into ontology or metaphysics. All being as such is one, or there's a unity to being as being. In traditional logic, we can predicate or think about the predication of all that exists. Ideas also exist in various degrees in perfection in our mind. We are finite, fallible beings, after all. There are degrees of perfection. A clear idea is one that is distinct from other ideas. In contrast, an obscure idea is not so. I'm not a chemist, for example, so my ideas about many of the elements are more obscure, not clear. A distinct idea is not only clear, it's an idea in which the notes or characteristics of that idea are sharply distinguished from each other. In contrast, a confused idea is where these notes or characteristics are not so. Next, let's compare a complete idea with an incomplete idea. A complete idea contains all the notes of the object in question, whereas an incomplete idea is not so. A comprehensive idea is both clear and complete. It is an idea where we have full knowledge about it. Let's also compare a proper idea with an analogous idea in terms of our degrees of perfection. A proper idea represents an object as such. It represents its nature as it really is, directly as it were. An analogous idea represents an idea in a less perfect way. It's an awareness of an object by way of partial similarity. And this raises a consideration of ideas in relation to each other. We think about ideas as relational. Ideas can be intrinsically identical, intrinsically different, objectively identical, objectively different, congruent, or repugnant. Ideas can be identical. Intrinsically identical ideas have the same exact comprehension, formally, that is to say, as ideas in the mind. Objectively identical ideas have the same material object, that is, as they represent one and the same material object in the external world. And of course, ideas that are different are not identical. Ideas are congruent insofar as they can be united together in a synthesis without a logical problem. Or, in other words, congruent ideas can be formed together to produce new complex ideas. Ideas are repugnant insofar as they are opposite or oppose each other in some way. They can be opposite as contradictories, for example. And contradictories are not congruent ideas. They cannot be combined together because you get a logical contradiction. But they also can be privations vis-a-vis each other, in the sense that one is a positive note and the other is a negative note. Consider sight and blindness. They can be contraries insofar as they oppose each other as opposite extremes on a spectrum. Consider virtue versus vice. They can be correlative opposites when each of the terms necessarily implies the other. For example, father goes with son goes with father. Finally, we can also consider ideas that are associated with each other. That's when there's some kind of connection, be it intrinsic or extrinsic. If I say part, then we think of the term associated with that being whole. So this is an introduction to classifying ideas in a logical manner. This is one of the topics that you will find in a lot of traditional logic books. Traditional logic is much deeper than a lot of people think. A refined mind makes distinctions. And you see this clearly with traditional logic. I am the Amateur Logician from amateurlogician.com. I have a website, and that website has an extensive free tutorial on traditional verbal style logic. It contains many references and book recommendations on it. If you want to be a part of the community here, please consider signing up to my newsletter. You can also follow me on X, once known as Twitter. You can also follow me on Instagram. In any case, thanks for watching. Good luck to you and be well.